Ahoy, shipmates! Welcome back to On the Wind. I'm your host, Andy Schell. I've got an awesome episode today for you with Skip Novak, the legendary Skip Novak. Can't wait to share that with you. Before we get to that, I was going to say writing, but I'm not writing. I'm talking. I'm talking to you from a very rainy Ellos, Sweden. I'm at the Hallbergrassi boatyard on Falcon. We brought the boat down here yesterday. Really cool to be back in the Hallbergrassi factory. Me and I were first here, it's probably almost 10 years ago for World Cruising Club. We had a booth here and got to know Magnus Rassi. He's been on the podcast several times. And now we have Falcon in the show. So those of you that came to the show this weekend, because this will come out after the show's already happened, thanks for being there. I hope we had a good time. As of right now, it's pouring down rain, and it's supposed to be gusting in the high 40s tomorrow night. So great boat show weather. We'll see if the real sailors actually make it out here. A couple quick things to promote. Speaking of boat shows, we've got the Annapolis Boat Show coming up quicker than I'm ready for. Me and Mia and Blue and Brady from Cruisers Academy are teaming up to do a joint workshop, half-day workshop, and party. And also our very own August is going to be there. August Sandberg, skipper of Eastbjorn, is going to be at the boat show in Annapolis for the first time ever. We have a booth. Brady and Blue have a booth nearby ours. And, of course, our workshop that we're calling Offshore Cruising Distilled, the shit that matters most. We've sold some tickets to that. There's still some available. It's going to be at Ram's Head. It's a half day. Get you in and out, and then you can go to the boat show that afternoon. And then, of course, our Sailors Social, the annual crew party that we have every year, which was a huge fun last year. Those tickets are also available. All this is on 59-north.com/boat show. So if you want to join us in Annapolis, I highly recommend you get over there and buy tickets before they sell out. And can't wait to see all of you back in our home port in the USA. So Skip Novak, he's become sort of a mentor, like a lot of other people that I looked up to. He's given us access to his ideas, and he always answers my emails. We share a couple skippers. Chris Kobush works for us and for Skip. And it's just been really cool to kind of pick his brain on stuff offline. I have a lot of emails between me and Skip. He's been very helpful, like I said. But this online chat was probably the most fun yet. Skip has a new book out called Skip Novak, Words of Wisdom After 50 Years Afloat. And it's basically a compilation of all the columns he'd written for Yachting World magazine over the years. There's like 100 of them. Incidentally, Nikki Henderson, who runs our racing program, took over Skip's column in Yachting World when he left. So that was a pretty big deal for Nikki, because prior to Skip, that column belonged to Sir Robin Knox Johnston. So really good company there, really cool lineage. So good on you, Nikki, for that. But anyway, Skip has a way of like telling it how it is, or at least how he sees it. And there's a lot of controversial topics that he's written about, including safety, when or when not to wear life jackets, women in sailing, which obviously was a bit awkward for me and Skip to talk about since we're two dudes and can't really comment on it, but we did anyway. He talks about sort of wokeness a lot with terminology and stuff. Really interesting kind of electrical kind of wire topics that he has no problem talking about and does a pretty good job of justifying. And the cool thing about the book is each column is footnoted. So Skip goes back and reflects on, does he still have this opinion that he had when he wrote the column? Because some of them are now 10, 12 years old. And of course, a lot of old sea stories from back in the day. And the book is organized. I've read it. I got an advance copy from the publisher. I read it. And it's organized into topics. So there's like sections. Instead of it being chronological, it's like, here's a section on seamanship. Here's a section on boat design. Here's a section on old-time stories from back in the day and things like that. Here's a section on expedition sailing. So it's one of those books that you can pick up and put down anytime, and it's just a great resource. And Skip's still doing it. He's my dad's age. He's 72 years old. He's got 2 new boats they just launched, Vincent of Antarctica and Amundsen. One's going to be in the northern hemisphere, one's in the south, and he's still setting the tone for the rest of us that do this kind of business. He's the gold standard, and we just try to do our best to get close to that. So thanks to Skip for doing this. Definitely pick up a copy of his book. I think you'll really love it, and I hope you enjoy this conversation between me and Skip. Until next week, hold fast. On the Wind is presented by The Quarterdeck, our very own online home port for 59 North, where me, August, and the rest of the 59 North staff dive deep on the art of seamanship. Join us and over 400 members to discuss all the aspects of sailing and seamanship, everything you wanted to know, talk to us directly, ask questions, and hear our own thoughts. There was a recent post I did about a pretty major shaft seal leak we had on Falcon last week, and how I troubleshot it and how we ultimately fixed it. You can read stuff like that. You can post your own questions, and August, myself, Mia, and the rest of the gang will chime in and give you our opinions. So hope to see you on the quarterdeck. You can go to quarterdeck.59-north.com to sign up, and we'll see you there. You're listening to On the Wind, my podcast about offshore sailing. I'm your host, Andy Schell. Skip Novak returns to the podcast to talk about his new book, Skip Novak On Sailing, Words of Wisdom from 50 Years Afloat. There's not much Skip hasn't done in his remarkable sailing career, including 4 Whitbread races, a 5th round-the-world race on a maxi catamaran, and of course pioneering expedition sailing in Tierra del Fuego, Cape Horn, and Antarctica. I talked to Skip about his new book, and in particular some of the more controversial topics that he writes about. Skip, tell me your name and what you had for breakfast.
Yeah, Skip Novak, fruit and toast and all that sort of thing.
All right, this is going to be fine. We'll forget the local recording. I'll just do it all from here, and if you can hear me like this will work.
Yeah, no, this is fine. Yeah, this is probably simpler.
Where are you?
UK in Dorset, my Dorset bubble here. Yeah,
your Dorset bubble.
Yeah.
I'm on Falcon in Sweden at Vindo Marine, getting a little mini maintenance done between trips while we can, because we've got a good boatyard here.
All right, nice. Okay,
yeah,
great.
Are you ready to start?
Yeah, anytime.
Cool. And do you have a time limit? Do you have a time frame?
No, I'm fine. Yeah.
All right.
All decks are all clear here. Yeah.
Cool. Well, welcome back to the show, Skip. It's awesome to have you again. I've been reading your book, which I've read most of your columns as they appeared in Yachting World, but it's nice to have them all in one place, and that's kind of what prompted this conversation. So you emailed me. You said, "Hey, I've got this series of columns coming out as a book. A lot of it's controversial. Could make a fun conversation." So, do you like? You have your opinions, and I happen to share a lot of them. But like when you write this stuff, are you deliberately sometimes being provocative, or where's the balance between what you actually think and writing something that you know is going to get a response?
Well, basically everything I write, I firmly believe in everything I wrote, but I know it's thought provoking because it goes against a lot of mainstream opinion and a lot of things that have just fallen into line, and a lot of it brainwashing, quite frankly, about a lot of issues over the years. And so, yeah, I sort of enjoy sticking my, neck out, and every now and again I got chopped off in those columns, letters to the editor. And I know that everybody doesn't agree with it, but that's fine. I mean, I like to, I think it's a good thing to have a discussion and not just go with the flow. And I think, I'm pretty certain that a lot of the things I talk about, there's a lot of people who sympathize with what I'm saying, and then of course they don't want to stick their neck out as well, because that's the tidal flow is in all these directions, which I don't agree with in quite a lot of things. And I'm sort of can be viewed as a bit of a retro figure, going back, harking to the good old days and back in the day stuff. I sort of compare it to how I sailed 50 years ago or 40 years ago, and the amount of enjoyment I got out of it because of the simplicity of the boats, because of the way we sailed, the sense of adventure, etc., and because of the changes in design, equipment, a whole bunch of overload on safety issues, etc. I'm finding it more and more less enjoyable sailing in that fashion. That's sort of the long and short of it.
Well, yeah, totally. And it's really interesting. A couple of quick things come to mind. I mean, you sailed in the Whitbread back in the day, and we met Gerard Dykstra, who had sailed on Flyer, I guess. And we met him in Iceland on his best ever 53, which he had outfitted like it was his boat. He designed it for himself. He had no pressure water. He had super simple everything. And it's like just goes to show you that somebody like him, at the very, very top of his game as a designer in retirement, chose to have a sailboat of that level of simplicity versus what is being sold to most people and what most people think they want.
Well, that's the whole thing. And Jerry, some of the boats he's been involved in are the upper crust of super yachting and all the rest of it. But that is sort of the demand for those sort of amenities and that level of sophistication, that level of luxury that's been sort of created over the years. And the size of the boats is another thing. I mean, the absolutely, outscale size of these super yachts. But here's a guy who started like me from scratch, sailing on small boats. And when you build your own boat, he goes 180 and does something totally counterintuitive. When you look at what he's done in as a career, so that says something. I mean, so yeah.
He could have had whatever he wanted. He could have whatever he wanted, and he chose that.
Yeah. Jerry's got a little 35-footer now, that he just toodles around with in Friesland Islands, and same story. Super simple boat, tiller steered and lifting keel, and he can beach it, lifting rudder, and all the rest of it. And it's going back to basics because that's what we want, and that's what I tried to advocate in sailing generally. Is that everybody is being led by design issues, by equipment suppliers, and by builders loading it on. And it creates a lot of frustration because a lot of these things, almost none of this stuff works all the time. And you spend a lot of your time on a cruise or on a world voyage, excuse me, fixing things and expecting spare parts to be flown in. And the question is, do you really need a lot of these things to go cruising and have a good time? And that's sort of the philosophy that's been engendered, I think, through the marine industry.
Yeah, it's also, I always note when people that sail with us are either prospective boat buyers or they have their own boat. And I always laugh that of all the professional sailors that I know, I think we all have, if we have personal boats at all, they're all under 40 feet and rather simple. Chris, who works for both of us, good example. He has a 36-foot steel boat. I was going to ask you, have you, besides the boats, the Pelagics and now Vincent and the big boats, have you ever owned your own boat?
Well, I've got, my 54-foot Pelagic, my original boat. And then Pelagic Australis was my own boat. And I sold that to Greenpeace in 21. Vincent and Amundsen, the two Pelagic 77s, are owned by a Chilean colleague, Nicholas Ibanez. But I still have my 54-foot Pelagic in Maine. And it's interesting. Last year we did a Greenland cruise with my son and a few friends and my partner up the west coast of Greenland from Cape Farvel all the way up to 78 North. 3 months, 6,500 miles back to Maine. And I think the two things that went wrong were a diaphragm in a pump discharging the galley sink and another one discharging the head sink. And that was all that went wrong all summer. And there's something to be said for that because there were no systems on the boat. Same story. We do have pressure water, but there's nothing much to fix on that thing. It's so simple, and the size of the boat's amazing. 54 feet is a bit bigger than a 40-footer. But when I go from the 77s, or Pelagic Australis for that matter, in those days she was 74, back to Pelagic, it's a revelation. It's an epiphany every time you do it. When you start out, you sort of, oh my God, I'm not going to be able to function on this little boat coming from this spacious big 77s. And you sort of hit your head, a few places and bark your shins, moving around the boat. Then after a few days, you get used to it, and it's just so nice to be on a small boat. And what you can do on a small boat, in terms of being creative navigationally, well, there's no comparison about getting in close, tying up to walls, beaching the boat, things you can't do on a big 77-footer that's 70 tons. You just can't take those sort of risks. So the advantages definitely, I think, outweigh the disadvantages in terms of size, if you have a small party.
Even so, all the the Pelagic, the first one and the second one, they were your boats, but you were using them for a purpose, right? So have you ever had a boat? When's the last boat you've had that was purely for recreation?
I've got two lasers down in Cape Town.
Exactly my point. Exactly my point. Exactly my point. So, I think to your point, Mia and I have a Norlene 34 here in Sweden, and just stupid things like when you go to take the mainsail down and put the sail cover on, like on Falcon, it's a huge process. You got to almost put someone in the bosun's chair to get high enough to get it covered. And then you take all that for granted because you get used to the big boats. You get used to, we sail with a crew of 10. You get used to that. But then when you go home and you go sailing on your own boat, it's like, oh my gosh, this is so easy. This is so nice.
Yeah. Time and time again, repeats itself. That's why, I'm keeping my little boat, even though we're not really chartering very actively with it these days. Doing a few things in Canadian Maritimes and, up in the Arctic. But it's really just for me and family and friends now. And I'll try to go back as often as I can, just sailing for myself. Because, my whole career was, after racing, was chartering, where every trip we did was a commercial charter. And, of course, to make the whole boat work and all the rest of it, we had to actually be commercial. I didn't have the luxury of going cruising around the world with a budget. And so, I've sort of worked my passage finally, at the age of 72, where I can actually do some cruising for myself, which is,
You've been a big help to us. Like I've emailed you questions behind the scenes about the commercial aspects of this and how to do everything by the book. And I get the impression that that's one of the things that has changed since you started with Little Pelagic, not just with the coding of the boats themselves, but the places you go. And I wonder if you can just talk to, I imagine that must continue to be a fairly frustrating evolution as things. What all we're trying to do is, take people to amazing places under sail. That there's more and more red tape. How has that evolved? Because you've been doing this way longer than we have, obviously.
Yeah, everywhere is the same. There's more due diligence being proffered by the national authorities in places like the Arctic, where everywhere we go is sovereign territory. They're all countries. And then down south, you've got the Antarctic, which is managed by the Antarctic Treaty. Which is an overload of tourism going on. It's part of the tourist explosion globally in all parts of the world, not just marine. And these are, the tourist industry is sort of being looked at now. In fact, there's a program on tonight on Radio 4 and the BBC about the tourist explosion and the ethos of the whole thing. And certainly in the Antarctic context, there had to be more red tape created purely because of the numbers going down there, mainly in cruise ships. Sailboats, yes, there's more sailboats than there were 30, 40 years ago, obviously. But the sailboats represent such a tiny portion of the footfall. In the Antarctic, it's almost inconsequential, whereas the tour ships have exploded. And as you know, in Svalbard is the same story. I mean, in summer, you're never alone in a fjord anywhere, and that's now true of the Antarctic Peninsula. And same getting that way in South Georgia. And it had to happen just because the governments, they've just had to do something and try to manage it and try to mitigate maritime disasters. Mainly it's ship driven, not yacht driven, sadly. And we're sort of we're suffering because of it on the yachts. All the places we used to go to and explore, is sense of exploration anyway, very hard to find in high latitudes now. There's still scope, I think, more in the Arctic than there is in the South, actually. The South is pretty saturated, I have to say, sadly.
What about the boat stuff, though? Like when, you built these two the Pelagic 77s, was there anything during that process that made you change the design of what you wanted because of, the code around them, building them to code?
Not really. I mean, they've got to be built to code if you want to operate commercially and you want to be able to get insurance easily and you want to going through the application processes with the governments to have that coding is absolutely pretty essential. Well, it certainly makes your life easier. A lot of people do duck and dive chartering down there without coding. But yeah, I think it would be getting more and more hard.
How do you feel about that? Do you resent your competition for not playing by the rules?
Yeah, I mean, to a great extent. I mean, we're a member of the Antarctic Tour Operators Association, and I was one of the first yacht members to join that thing, which was a ship-based organization, of self-regulation in the Antarctic. And I got a lot of my other colleagues to join. We've got a good cohort of IATO yacht members, but then on the other side, there's another cohort who have sort of rejected the idea of being, controlled by IATO. That's how they sort of see it, and going off on their own. Some, you don't have to be a member of IATO to go to Antarctica. And some of these guys who have been there for years, they do a great job. They get their permits. They know what they're doing. Then there's another group who are mavericks, who are sort of living in the distant past about how it used to be, and just roaming around, creating all sorts of problems. Not really playing by the new book of rules, which there had to be. So yeah, it is an issue, and we do sort of resent these sort of people, because we spend a lot of time trying to do the right thing, and being a member of IATO and getting the proper permits. It's a lot of work. I mean, that's what I do. What a part of my job now, it always has been, was permitting, and making sure all your ducks in a row. So yeah, it's a big burden on you, on any yacht operator, especially one who's, like a lot of my colleagues are, one-man bands or a couple on a boat, and they're doing everything on board, living on board. I have the luxury, I'm in an office most of the time, and I cherry pick the trips I want to do, but my job is to keep the boats busy. Yeah.
Was that always the goal for you? Like when you set out to build this business, was there a goal with how you wanted to spend your time? Did you want to be on the boats all the time? Did you want to be sitting at the top? What was the goal?
I sort of started out wanting to do something different than ocean racing. That was how it all began. That's how we formed.
Why did you get sick of ocean racing, or?
Well, I not sick of it, because I always enjoyed it, but I thought to myself, am I going to wind up to be 50 or 60, and that's all I've done in life, type thing. And I wanted to do more mountaineering, because I'm an amateur mountaineer, climber, ski mountaineer, etc. And the attraction of going to these sort of remote Southern Ocean islands and Antarctica, South Georgia, Patagonia, and you can only access some of these areas by boat, was a good marriage between my sailing career, my expertise and profession, with my, passion to go climbing with my friends. That's how it started. It was, build pelagic and let's have a few expeditions. And then I saw a charter opportunity, and one thing led to the other, and it became a lifestyle and a business, and here we're now running 2 77-footers and high latitudes, which are so far very successful, and there is demand. So we've tried to be, a cut above in terms of the dedicated built boats, as opposed to buying a used boat and modifying it. So they're custom made for that job. I think we're the only ones around that are. And try to lift the level of capability for people like science teams. We've done quite a lot of science projects with Vincent of Antarctica, film streaming services, and that type of thing that require, a lot of space on board, a lot of deck space, good living space, etc., good communication systems, and a really good crew to service these people. So that's been our goal, is to be, sort of top dog in high latitudes of that sort of scale. I mean, there's other boats that are bigger, small super yachts, mainly motorboats, small ships and things that do it on a different scale. But, I still like to go sailing. That's my thing. Somebody says, oh yeah, you should have a motorboat, because you spend a lot of your time motoring, which is true, but I still like to sail. I wouldn't want to have a motorboat really, or I wouldn't even want to have a motor sailor, but yeah. So I think we're in a good place, and there is demand. How the future is going to pan out with the tourism explosion is the big question for everybody, cruise ships included. About, a lot of people want to control the numbers, but it's very difficult to do that without getting into antitrust issues in certain places. Certainly in the Antarctic, that's a thing. So I don't know. For the time being, I think we're good to go for at least another 10 years. At least, well, I'm still in the gymnastic mode, and I can still do it.
So yeah. I may be oversimplifying this, but like, you had this ocean racing career where you were effectively working for someone else. You didn't own the boats. You were in some role for someone else. Now you control everything, but also have all the responsibility. Do you ever? How has that trade played out for you? Do you ever have times where you wish that someone else was responsible and you could just go home and forget about work for the day?
Well, definitely during the pelagic years from 1990, say, through 2021, when I sold Pelagic Australis, I had it all on my shoulders. I mean, I was a one-man band pretty much. And yeah, it was pretty stressful. Certainly with Pelagic Australis scaling up, I had to borrow money to do it. I had an investor from the States and loans to pay off. And so, yeah, it was pretty full on. And of course, then when we sold Pelagic Australis to Greenpeace in 21, we were building Vincent of Antarctica at the same time, which was for my Chilean colleague, Nicholas. And of course, that was a different thing now because Nicholas was funding it. And one of his dreams was to make a partnership with me because he liked the style of the pelagics and all that sort of thing. But we have other people involved. Right now, it's a big team based in Barcelona. So a lot of that responsibility and a lot of the day-to-day work has been taken off my shoulders in terms of, salaries of crew, placing insurances, spare parts, and all that type of thing. We've got a technical guy down there doing that and a big office in Barcelona taking care of all the other stuff. So my job has evolved now into really marketing via Pelagic Expeditions. I'm the sole agent for these boats. So finding the clients, facilitating the trips, doing the permitting, maintaining our IATO membership, and that's really pretty much what I'm doing now and all I do. And I'm involved with all the crews, obviously. I'm involved with technical issues, but there's a lot of backup, which is great. We've got a great team.
How does that feel now, having gotten here? Had you ever thought about what it would feel like not being a one-man band?
Well, I was always hoping it would be, but in the early days, I couldn't afford to bring in, let's say, another partner with Pelagic. The numbers wouldn't have worked out where I could actually survive and raise a family at the same time and all the rest of it. So I just had to pull my finger out and get on with things, and it was pretty full on all those decades. But now it's a lot more relaxing because I've got a lot more people to rely on. It's more collaborative between all the people on the team. And we've got people in offices and we've got the crews. We've got like 4 sets of skippers and mates and crews going between the 2 boats. That's the sort of the theory going forward. So we're not burning people out, on the Pelagic years. I mean, it was, I used to engage a crew for 3 years. That was the goal. The first year was sort of like, if they hadn't been there, it was a year of learning where to go, how to deal with the authorities, all the tricks of operating in the Antarctic, how to deal with the ice if you haven't been. And so we would have to have the previous skippers tutoring the new group. And then the second year, they can do it themselves, but it's still a learning operation. And the third year, they gain some expertise. And I found that by the end of the third year, they almost have to retire off because it's been so full on for the 3 years that, to press them on for a fourth year, it's almost too much. And they were sort of, they had enough as well. Luckily, a lot of those groups of people who went through that 3-year cycle sort of went freelance. And I'm still using a lot of my old skippers to fill in when we need them. So they've gone off and they have become experts of the area, and they have worked for other people down south and up north. So we've created a whole stable of really good skippers and sailors and mates to draw on when we need them. Yeah.
I've been trying to reconcile with that sort of balance as well, because not just burning out myself, but our crew, exact same story. And a lot of us now that work on our team either have small kids or want to. I guess my question for you is do you think it's possible to have both, to have a family life and still pursue being on the boat in these sort of extreme environments, doing these things that we really love to do? Is it possible to reconcile those two things? Or am I just trying to do something that's inherently impossible?
No, I think probably what you're doing represents an evolution of how it's going. And a lot of the skippers, like Chris and Sophie, they've got a child now, but they're still sailing. And it's really a case of creating something it's like working on an oil rig. You're on the rig for a certain number of weeks or months, and then you're off and you're back home. And that's how it's gone. And even on the super yachts too, all these super yachts, they've got 2 skippers, 2 chief engineers, 2 chief stewardess or stewardesses, because nobody can do this full time. It's just too intense. So I think that is how the marine industry, in terms of manning, is evolving. And in terms of running a business like what we're doing, it's the same story. You couldn't do it all, and so you have to engage more people and give them more time off, as opposed to expecting somebody to do a whole southern season without a break. Nowadays is almost unpalatable, to most people.
Yeah, and I think you also have the side effect where, like, because of that, you've got to charge more. And then when you're competing, we have more competition than you do. And we've been really trying to raise rates in the business, because people need to make if you want to have a skipper that also has a house, maybe a mortgage, a family, like, you got to pay them a living wage. And then you have the other side of that, where you have young people that, and I was in this group, would so happily work for free to get experience that it's very easy to take advantage of people in that regard as well. And it's a really interesting, I mean, we're talking little industry nerdy stuff now, but it's something I think about a lot, to try to figure out, how do you balance it? How do you charge enough money to still have customers to pay for not just the boats, but the staff? Because the people are the most important thing. They're the they're first in line, right? They run the trips.
Well, absolutely. And I think, it's the keeping up the level of enthusiasm for the crews too.
Totally.
They're working on, some sort of system, 4 months off, 4 months off, and they come in fresh, as opposed to, grinding away for, 9-10 months without a break. You can see how this can break down, and, another group of clients come on board and everybody's, tired, burned out. Something happened on the last trip, and, it's not great for the clients to have people that are tired and sort of at their wits' end, maybe. So that's what we discovered over the years. Sometimes by the end of the season, everybody's pretty shot. And so now with this new dynamic of, as you said, time on the boat, time off the boat, time to have a normal family life, that's important. Come to it fresh. That is the new way, although it is more expensive. We're seeing the same thing. We're having to pay people on their time off, to keep them.
Yeah, exactly. That's the other thing too, because to give enough people enough time off, you got to pay them. I mean, I think it's all good. I guess I'm talking about this because I think this is the way the whole business should go. I think there's still other people that aren't doing this, and it's it's difficult to compete with. Back to some of the controversial stuff. You just mentioned the word manning, and that was an article I just read in your book about the linguistics, gender stuff specifically. You talk a lot. The concept of sort of wokeism comes through a lot of the columns in this book. I really like how the book's organized in sections instead of chronologically. Now, I'm curious to your thoughts, because we've had this conversation as well. We have almost a 50-50 split of male-female staff working for us, which has been our goal. And we have, we guarantee 2 spots for women on every trip, and we try to go above that to 50-50. We've tried the linguistics thing, and I'm curious to your opinion on this. The word seamanship falls under that category of tradition, and it's such a good word to describe it encompasses everything we do, but it's got the word man in there. So we have chosen to, instead of changing it, we said, all right, let's acknowledge it. Let's just take this one word and acknowledge it and try to change it. And what we've done is we still have seamanship, but we spell it with an apostrophe instead of the A, kind of like forecastle was apostrophized to forecastle. We've tried to take that same concept and keep the word, but just acknowledge that actually we're thinking about this. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, you could go down that route, I suppose, and try to tweak these things. As I said in the article, I started out in that this idea of writing that thing by having the word man, not specifically meaning the male of the Homo sapiens, man being all of Homo sapiens, man and female, and
human, effectively.
Humans, that's how you talk about man, descent of man. Charles Darwin, for example. And of course, that got blown out of the water with the conversation I had with my daughter, and But at the end of the day, I think it's more important with all these issues to give the women on board these boats the responsibility, let's have some women skippers. I've had women skippers. I mean, I had Kirsten Neuschaffer for years, and before that, I had another woman, in the 90s, and give them a good shot at the responsibility, not focus so much on the semantics of linguistics in all these terms, because it's very difficult to change it all now globally to get a standard. And a lot of this stuff, revolves around safety issues. What do you do about man overboard? What do you do about, calling out this and that? And you'd have to change a whole protocol of what's embedded in the marine industry and all this. So it's very difficult to try to tweak it on a basis for each yacht, and personalize it. I don't know how you do it, because every time you go on a different yacht, they'll be doing something different. Isn't it easier just to keep it the same and not worry about it, really? Because there's other things more important, i.e. getting more women engaged and giving them responsibility and all that sort of thing. And then I think once you do that, those sort of semantics become less important,
It is easy. It's easy for us to sit here, two white men, talking about this.
Yes, right. Yes, right.
So,
Yeah.
I agree with you, but at the same time, if there's enough of a movement that it has to happen, I also think that we should, this kind of with that seamanship word. It's like, all right, well, if this is going to happen, it's maybe this is a bad comparison, but you joined the IATO to be able to help write the rule book. Well, if this is going to happen, is it not better for us that have these thoughts and appreciate the tradition and stuff to actually have a say in it, instead of it just changing without us? I mean, I think we need to be. I think we need to be flexible in that, so that we don't get left behind, I guess is what I'm saying, because there's a danger in that as well.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's very difficult to, because in this context, as I said, we're taking an international standard of maritime language that is across the board in shipping and yachts and all sorts of things, and trying to create a new standard. And how do you get to that point of everybody accepting that standard? I don't know. For me, I don't think it's possible to achieve. And so you can, everybody's understanding what you're talking about in the end of the day. So,
and your point's more on the language than the actual concepts. It's not like you're saying women shouldn't be allowed on board, all this other stuff. You're not that much of a traditionalist, just to be clear.
Oh, no. I mean, that's what I'm saying. We've got women cruising all the boats. I mean, I always have done. And as I say, skippers, from way back. So yeah, you can't accuse me. Nobody can accuse me of that one. But I think to worry about these sort of things, I think there's, bigger fish to fry in getting people involved in sailing who, in terms of diversity issues, rather than worry about the language. I think the language is a sort of a, for me, inconsequential area. And how do you change, like that article ends about how to address the thing about how we always refer to vessels, any vessel in the feminine. She's a good sailor. She was great off the wind, and she became a bit of a handful, in that squall. How do we change all that stuff? I mean, do we use the neutral it? The whole thing sounds awkward to me. Do we really want to worry about these things when there's so many other things to worry about in the world? I don't think so.
So good segue, because you've written a couple of pieces about the Golden Globe. You said Kirsten worked for you, won the Golden Globe, and the OGR. We were supposed to do the OGR, dropped out when we built Falcon.
Yeah.
And now Kirsten won the GGR, and now Maiden won the OGR. But my question actually for you is, what are your thoughts on Don McIntyre as a visionary and as a race director? Because I have some very specific thoughts. I'm curious what yours are.
Well, I mean, there's no doubt he's found a successful business niche. I mean, he's quite clever about that, and he's found something that people have bought into. He's sort of subscribed, God knows how many editions, down the line. I know there's been a lot of complaints through all these events about race management, and I haven't kept that much my finger on the pulse about it. I know Don, from way back from his Antarctic days. He's did a lot of things in the Antarctic as well. He's quite a quite a prolific, eclectic sort of character. But I think he's doing things which, like this whole retro thing about the OGR and the Golden Globe. It's a can of worms to manage, trying to recreate something that existed way back when, and trying to do everything the same. And I pointed out in a lot of my pieces that it's very difficult to do it 100%. You got all the compromises now about safety issues and things you wouldn't go to sea, without having an EPIRB, for example. I mean. And so where do you draw the line is always tricky. And it's the same thing with, people trying to recreate all sorts of journeys of exploration in the same manner, or using the same clothing, etc. It's always slightly flawed. It's interesting, it's interesting to do these things, but you can never claim we've experienced it like Shackleton did, doing the Shackleton reverse dressed like Shackleton. I mean, it's slightly ludicrous. I think the OGR falls in that same trap, and trying to make it equitable between all the boats and making sure that nobody's sort of slightly cheating on things, because it's very easy to cheat on things like that. Tricky to manage and tricky to keep everybody happy at the same time while they're doing it. I think that's his challenge. And communication-wise is another one where people want to. Today everybody wants to see what everybody else is doing offshore on these normal ocean races, and the same thing with the GGR and the OGR. Probably he needs to look at more sophisticated communication setups to get more stories off the boat. They did it with the GGR, I think, but the Golden Globe was, hamstrung about taking pictures with a normal film camera and passing film over at the stopovers. I think that became very awkward. But you can't gainsay him for what he's done, because they got people queuing up to do these things. So he's found a niche. Yeah.
Well, I mean, I agree. I think the visionary part of it's great. Because we decided we were going to drop out of OGR, observe this one, and decide if it's something we want to do next time. Because for me, the appeal is like just what you said. I never had the opportunity to do a long passage on Celestial with real stakes. We're beyond that. Those days are over. But to me, it's a really appealing challenge to manufacture these rules, because I want to see what it's like. I want to see what it feels like. I'll never actually know what it feels like, because I'll always know, you're going to have a GPS on board. You're never in trouble. Yeah. But I think that's the real appeal for me, that I'm 20 years too late. I've never sailed without GPS.
Yeah.
But what bugged me about the OGR specifically, and some things with GGR, it seemed like Don was moving the goal line. Rules changed. The rules applied differently to different boats. And I think that was such a shame, because I think the concept was really great. And the one specific thing I'm talking about is back to the women in sailing thing. He had a requirement that each boat in the OGR have at least one female crew. And then when one of the boats created such a bad culture on board that all the women either left or went to maiden, he made an exception for them, that they could continue racing. And I think that's the kind of thing that's really frustrating to see when we're also trying to make a 50-50 mix as much as possible. And then you see that the rules just change, because for him to kick a boat out of the race would have been bad for the race. And I just wish that there could be rules that everybody sticks to, I guess is what I'm saying.
Yeah. I think that's right. And I think that's what he's up against is, taking a lot of old boats and a lot of people who, are not professional sailors as well. And so it's a whole different dynamic than, let's say, doing any of the, the premier ocean racing events. So he's got to be flexible, but as soon as you're flexible in one hand, you piss a lot of people off on the other, who've done the right thing and are playing by the rules.
Yep.
And he's always, fighting to keep everybody in the game, as opposed to, let's say, disqualifying somebody because the girl left, and now they're all males, and Christ, what are we gonna do about that? And it's a mess, and the guy's paid his entry fee, yeah. So he's as I said in the beginning, he's dealing with a can of worms. I mean, that's for sure.
Yeah. What do you think? I mean, what do you think there needs to be a rule for organized events to increase female participation?
Well, I comment
or I should say opportunity, because opportunity is what we're talking about.
Well, that's a controversy that sort of began with the Volvo Ocean Race in a big way, which I comment on in several articles that appear in the book. And they played with this for several editions where there was all girl teams, all female teams, historically, so I think since Tracy's thing. And after Tracy's thing, it didn't really, when they came to a one design sort of box rule concept, they never did very well, the all women team. They were last or second to last at best, and everybody was sort of speculating on why this is. And then in future editions, they mandated a certain percentage of women on the boats, and then it got really complicated by a combination of 7 men and with 2 women, or 50-50, or if it was all men it could only be 6 men. I mean, the whole thing became so ridiculously complicated, and I advocated simplest cases go 50-50, which I think Dika Ferry did in one of the races, which I think was very successful, and that was a simple formula that nobody really took on board, because they claimed there wasn't enough good female sailors, etc. And then you had people like Paul Kayard coming up and saying, well, this is a premier event. You should be allowed to pick the best crew, male or female. If it happens to be all male, so be it. There shouldn't be any constraints on gender equality. But I'm still a big fan of 50-50. It's a simple formula, and there's plenty of good sailors, female sailors nowadays. There'll be more in the future, and this is how you build up that cohort anyway.
Yeah, I was going to say, you have the chicken or the egg thing. What Paul Kayard says, if you're going to take all the best sailors, but there's never any opportunity to develop new good sailors, how do you get past that?
Yeah, right. Yeah, so I think to do it very simple formula is great, and there's plenty of women who want to do these things like the GGR for sure, and not play with tweaking percentages and all the rest of it. I think that's too complicated for everybody to understand, the spectators and the followers even. So, yeah.
Do you think, so the GGR Kirsten won and the OGR Maiden won, I get a sense that some people don't think that counts.
In the terms of the Maiden and Kirsten.
Yeah, like for the OGR and GGR, do they count as ocean races, even though they're sort of separate? I'm wondering here, do people actually acknowledge that? Does that count, or are we still saying, well, an all women team has never won a big ocean race? Does that count?
No, I think it does count, and I think you look at the Vendée Globe now, and the women doing the Vendée Globe. I mean, they're right up at the top in a lot of cases, and beginning with Ellen MacArthur way back. And then you got Sam Davis, and you got French girls. I mean, they're absolutely capable, and so I think that's not really an issue. And you can't gainsay or take anything away from the maiden crew or Kirsten. I mean, yeah, it's all be to praise for sure. Yeah.
So changing gears a little bit, you talk a lot about safety, and now we're sort of still on the subject of rules. But here in Sweden, just yesterday, we're out and we were motoring Falcon up from Marstrand to Vindo. It's like a 35-mile, very coastal, mostly inshore in these small canals and stuff. And it was a flat, calm day. There was 5 knots of wind maybe. And there's a lot of other boats out. And everybody wears life jackets, to the point where I was asking the other Swedes on board, like, am I missing? Is this a law here? What's going on? And it's not. They're just like, this is just it. Swedes are very, very much rule followers. And it's what you say. It's just like, it's an all the time thing. I know you don't believe in that. So what's your take on this? I find it like astonishing, because I grew up, we wear a life jacket when you need to wear a life jacket, and that was that.
Yeah. Well, yeah, I'm with you on that. I mean, that's exactly my experience. It was a revelation in the Hamble River when people were motoring out the Hamble River in a dead flat, calm day and a hot summer's morning, and they all had life jackets and harnesses on going up and down the river. And I hadn't been there in a while. I asked some old guy, rowed in from his pontoon saying, is it a rule now? Everybody has to have, oh, no. He said, he just hung his head down and said, nah, that's just the way it's gone. So this is one of my examples of brainwashing in safety issues is the life jacket thing, which drives me absolutely crazy. Because I grew up, same story. When you needed a life jacket, you learned when to put one on and not have one on all the time. because I just think it's uncomfortable to have a life jacket on if it's a sunny day, flat water, and there's no risk. It's a judgment of risk, and the problem is we're losing the ability to judge ourselves and for our crews when that risk is to an extent where, yes, you must put a life jacket on, or it's a good idea, or whatever. But it's a discussion point, and at the moment, to have everybody don a life jacket on before you leave the dock, I think is ludicrous. I just cannot see. Yeah, and I'm a bit too around the bend, and probably too old. But it's heading that way, whereas more and more people are buying into that philosophy, and for me, it's engendering a fear of the ocean as well. Like what's the problem of jumping overboard in the middle of the ocean and having a swim and hanging from the back of a rope? This is all the shit we used to do, and now nobody does that. They're all afraid. This is what's happening, and oh my God. And I had people on the boat who were shocked at some of the things people were doing, on our boats, just by, climbing up to the first spreaders with no safety harness on or Jumar or anything, and just, sailing how we used to do it in the day. I think you froze up again there, Andy.
I'm back. Sorry.
You're back. Yeah. Yeah. So that, that's one of my sort of, it's one of those things with the safety thing. You got to be really careful, because you could live to regret some of the things you've said if there's an accident. One death changes everything, of course. But I'm willing to sort of take that risk and push back on some of these things. I think I got enough gravitas to do that, and try to wake people up a bit about just, if you think you need a life jacket, that's fine. I don't, if I think you need to put one on as a skipper, I'll tell you. But other than that, let's relax a bit and enjoy ourselves, because I think we're just being encumbered, and also too much safety equipment, and it engenders a false sense of security as well.
Well, I think that's exactly your point, and I teach the same thing that you teach, and I probably learned it from you. Of, when we do our safety briefings on our trips. Now, I do recognize, and I was going to ask you this: is there a distinction between recreational and when you have customers, clients on a trip, on a sailing trip? And I clearly think there is. I'm curious, how do you make that distinction, and how do your rules change whether you're out with friends versus on a trip with customers?
I think with customers, it's the same. And our boats, it's also the type of boat as well. The Pelagic 77s. I mean, the deck is so safe, and going out in the cockpit, it's a totally different design than most boats, and the risk factor is very minimal to somebody falling overboard in a benign condition. I mean, you can't imagine it. So yeah, we, in terms of if I'm running the show, some of my skippers are different though, of course, and they go with the full life jacket, Monty. And I'm trying to say, well, going up the Beagle Channel in a nice day, do you really need to have a life jacket on? But they've been brought up, they're younger, and they've been brought up in this environment where every time you're on a floating object, you have a life jacket. And I'm trying to push back on it, with our skippers as well, and trying to go in the other direction and be a bit more relaxed about these things, because the statistics don't bear it out. People just don't throw themselves off the boat and fall over backwards. I mean, it just does not happen.
Well, to that point, when when we give our safety briefings, the first thing I'll ask is, what keeps you on the boat? And inevitably, and this is the answer I hope people give, somebody will always say, "Oh, my life jacket and tether," and that's not the right answer.
No,
it's you keep you on the boat, and I think that's actually what we're talking about here, is not just life jacket rules, but how do you keep yourself safe on the boat, and then how do you judge that risk? How do you know? It's just like climbing. You're into mountaineering. You're not going to not use a rope when a rope is required, but you're not climbing up the rope. You're climbing up the mountain. The rope is there to catch you if you make a mistake. And that's how I teach the life jackets and tethers. It's like, you need to keep yourself on the boat, and if you make a mistake, the safety equipment might save your life, but it might not. Yeah.
It's a delicate subject, and there's not a lot of people who will advocate in my sort of philosophy, because it is a risk philosophy to advocate. If something goes wrong on one of my boats, and as somebody said the other day, said, well, how would you answer to a court of inquiry or a coroner's inquiry if somebody fell overboard on the boat and they didn't have a life jacket on? That's what I've been, sort of asked by somebody. And I said, well, yeah, I don't know. I'll, cross that bridge when I come to it, but I'm not all of a sudden go crazy on, I can't do it. I mean, I very rarely wear a life jacket myself. But when I need one, I know when to put one on. I know exactly when that moment comes, where I feel not confident about going forward without, more importantly, the harness clipped in. The other sort of the irony of this whole thing is everybody puts life jackets on, wanders around the boat, but they don't clip in all the time. So if you're not clipped in, well, that's more important than being clipped in rough seas than just having the life jacket. You can make a case for just having harnesses. In the old days, we had harnesses, but no life jackets.
Yeah.
A lot of the Whitbread races.
I think you also have to make a distinction. You mentioned the type of boat, but I think also the type of sailing, because a lot of the horror stories you hear come from racing. In particular, I'm thinking of Clipper, because when you're in a racing mode, the couple high profile incidents that happened on Clipper, a couple of which were, I was friends with the skipper on one of the more recent ones, so I can sympathize. But like, you're not going to put in a cruising context, you're not going to put a person in the same risky situation. For example, you're not going to send a crew member to the bow to change a head sail while going upwind cruising. You're going to bear away and flatten the boat and make that position way more safer than you are gonna when racing. So I think the racing scenarios tend to scare people that are never going to put themselves in that situation in the first place, or should learn not to. And I think that's what I try to emphasize as well, that it's based on the context. What are you actually, A, like you say, what boat are you on? And B, what situations are you going to put yourself in, and how can you avoid those situations when you're not racing?
Yeah, that's. I think what you're talking about there is education. Education.
Well,
educating people about all these different facets of that type of thing, which rather than have a one size fits all type cookbook method. And so that's a good one.
Are you aware of the story? It was I think it was last year, the year before, there was a big, I think it was a CNB 66 or some sort of large modern cruising boat that had a roller furling boom. They were going from Bermuda to Halifax, I think, and both the husband and wife were killed by the boom when they were trying to reef the sail. Did you remember this story?
No, I don't remember that one. Yeah.
Well, it was a pretty dramatic thing on the North American side of the pond, and people that know about it, we just had a couple on the last trip that talked about it because they're building a boat and they were debating whether they should have roller furling boom or main or slab reefing. And he made a comment that said, "Oh, well, the roller furling boom killed the couple." And it's like, that's an oversimplification. That's not what happened. They put themselves in a situation where it is common on a roller furling boom that you have to get the angles right for this furling mechanism to work. And it's trickier than reefing, slab reefing in different conditions. But like, the boom didn't kill them. Their lack of understanding of how to reef a boat offshore is what put them in that position to increase the risk. And that's the education thing that you're talking about. That's just so hard to get to everybody because you don't read about that when you hear the story.
Yeah, and it's all that thing about, when you're walking around the deck, not to put yourself in vulnerable positions, i.e. lured of a boom, if somebody lets the main sheet off, then there you go, or standing in the bight of a line through a turning block and all that stuff that's like second nature to me. We're trying to point these things out in safety briefings about, you don't clip into a piece of running rigging, all this type of things that sometimes are overlooked. And of course, you need the experience to make that automatic as well. I can speak from, from the point of view, second nature, where people who are, learning to sail, you got to constantly point things out. Don't stand there. If you go forward, go up the windward side, not the leeward side, and that's not evident to most, people that are fresh to the game. So, so that's the skipper's responsibility and the instructor's responsibility to watch all those things. Now, I think that's what happened during Clipper, because, they went through that tricky period of having only one professional on board, and they had, quite a few of these accidents and things like that, not only going overboard, but trauma. And then they wound up with two people. And, I would have advocated, well, if you have a 2-watch system, that's fine, because you always have one pro on board. you had a 3-watch system, you better have 3 pros on board, because there's always somebody who can watch out for those type of issues. People standing in the wrong place, grabbing onto something they shouldn't grab onto, that could let loose and suck their hand into a winch or a block or something. And if you don't have that oversight with amateurs, things will happen. Sure. Yeah.
That's such a different mindset too than, you talking about racing or professional racing from the world that you came from. Even back in the day when you guys were amateurs, but still at a professional level, the skipper doesn't have to look out for that stuff. You're just trying to sail the boat fast. Whereas nowadays, what we're doing, you got to watch people like a hawk. Like I always say that the trips are most successful if the skipper is doing the least. But what the skipper's doing that nobody even notices is all the things you just said.
Yeah, watching exactly. And I think that's in the OGR and all that type of thing. That's you're getting more amateurs. It's like a sort of a clipper race type thing, or the old Che Blythe thing. Is
challenge.
The oversight is everything of the guy in charge, the guy or girl in charge, professionals watching all the time and not getting involved too much in the mechanics. So yeah, very true. There's more people, let's face it, there's more people going sailing today, and by virtue of that statistic, there's going to be more people who are less experienced on the water. No doubt. That's very, very different from 50 years ago, that's for sure.
If we put this in the big picture, how do you define seamanship, which is kind of what we're talking about here? How do you define that?
Yeah, I think seamanship is probably, sailing on the ocean, getting from A to B safely, and in control, thinking ahead, having things like tools and spare parts, being able to jury rig things that will go wrong, and having the knowledge how to fix things. So it's a combination of a lot of different things. You could describe seamanship as, knowing how to tie a bowline or something. Well, there's a little bit more to that to it, but yes, many different facets of operating on an ocean, which can be quite vicious at times, and staying in control. I think that's basically, if you're going to say a few words, it's staying in control on the ocean, where you're in control and not the ocean. Yeah.
You could even take it a step further, and you're sailing on the ocean in safety and beyond control with some level of style, right?
Yeah,
almost. Yeah. Yves Jalina, who was a solo sailor and designed the Cape Horn wind vane, he used to compare. He was a French Canadian, very artistic guy, and he used to use his passages, compare them to like works of art, and the better the passage, the more stylistic it was, in the sense that it was like a pure representation of his artistic ability as a sailor, was to get from A to B as quickly and efficiently as possible with the least things happening.
Yeah. And I think if you're in like the top level ocean racing environment, you're cutting down your safety factors a bit. You're sailing on the edge, but still trying to do it seaman like. And quite often you're overstepping the bounds a bit, for speed. Whereas if you're cruising, you should always be way within, that danger point, and reefing early. That says it all. Reef early. Don't wait till it's blowing. You don't need to go a half a knot faster, with a sail flogging its guts out. I mean, sail conservatively. That's what we do on our boats. I mean, we're very careful in the boats. If you get there a half a day late, so what? But if you push it too hard, things will happen. Yeah.
The reason I like to add the style aspect in there is I think you can take that safely and conservatively too far. For example, one of my favorite things to do is to sail into a new harbor, approach a new harbor, come into an anchorage, under sail.
Yeah.
And most people just don't do that. And I actually think in a lot of cases, it's safer leaving sail up, because you're left with more options.
Absolutely.
And there's a misconception that, I'm showing off if I sail into a new anchorage. Yeah. But actually, I would argue that it is really fun. And yes, there's definitely a level of like, look what I can do. But it also leaves you more options if you are thinking through this. And I've sort of distilled down my definition of seamanship to being able to, if you really distill it down, being able to anticipate and then being able to adapt when you can't, when what you've anticipated doesn't come true, then being able to adapt to that. I think, like, very, very succinctly, that's kind of how I define it.
Yeah, no, I agree with you. I'm very keen on sailing off a mooring or off a dock, to a dock even. I've done it plenty, and it's great. And as you said, it's great fun, but it's good practice, because if you lose your engine, you have all these cases of people, calling out a rescue tow because their engine failed somewhere in the Solent or the Channel or something, and they should be sailing in, at least dropping a hook somewhere, and not calling out rescues. That's another thing about rescue services being overburdened. There's so many boats on the water nowadays, and so many people who aren't that experienced to be able to do things like that. So the more you practice those things, it should be engendered. Maneuvering, under sail in confined areas, always having a backup plan so you're not going to run into something. But yeah, it's good practice. Absolutely. 100%.
How do you mentioned in one of your articles about how you evaluate skippers you were hiring for pelagic with experience, because there's a fine line, I think, between seamanship to me is experience and knowledge. It's both those two things together, and you can't have one without the other. So if you've got someone that's sailed 50,000 miles but hasn't learned anything in the process, is that better than somebody that's sailed 10,000 miles but has memorized bowdage, for example, as a stupid example? You know what I mean?
Yeah. I suppose, how many miles you sail is a benchmark for sure, because the more miles you sail, the more things you will have seen in terms of things going wrong, and then having to repair those or mitigate those or adjust to that situation. So the amount of miles is important. And you have to then combine that with, well, in our case, same with you guys, working with clients and sailors on board. It's all about the personality and getting people engaged. And you do the same stuff. It's a vessel of participation. It's not a charter operation where you're serving the guests. Everybody's doing everything on board. So the gift for a good skipper in our context is getting everybody on side as a team as soon as they walk on board. And it's all about the personalities. And I think there's a lot of good sailors out there today. But the ones who can do that as well is making everybody feel comfortable, even if you've never been on a sailboat, and give them some net worth that they're there as a team member. That's the key, really, to have a happy ship and a happy charter. Yeah, no doubt.
I really like how you ended the epilogue in the book, where you're forward looking and not dwelling too much on nostalgia. I wonder if we can just wrap this up, if you can talk to that, but also I will ask you specifically, what are you looking forward to? You've done so much from sitting where I'm sitting. You've done it all. So what do you look forward to?
I think I'm still doing, I'm off to South Georgia in about 3 weeks' time to do another mountaineering expedition, going for some unclimbed peaks on the south end of the island with a pretty good team of climbers. So I'm still doing that type of thing, and we've got projects in the future, more of those coming up. I think one thing I want to do is sail more with my kids. My son's 20. He's actually doing his yachtmaster offshore in the Hamble this week, actually. And my daughter's sailing up in Norway on a little wooden boat. And we've sailed together, on pelagic in various places. They've been to the Antarctic and when they were little. But now they're old enough to crew professionally. And so hopefully, I'm not sure what they're going to do in life, but do some more trips with them, and do some more private trips up in the Arctic on pelagic and that type of thing. So, yeah, I've got a whole lot of things I'd like to do, and a lot of places I've never been to Alaska. I mean, it's crazy. I've got people up there. My skipper Hamish, he's living up there in Cordova. I want to go visit him, and so I've got a plan, maybe taking pelagic through the Northwest Passage, stick it in Cordova next to Seal, his boat, and spend a few years up there and coming and going back and forth. So yeah, I got plans. Yeah.
Question that you might not have an answer for. You're the same age as my dad. My dad has his own business, very different. It's a miniature golf course restaurant back in Pennsylvania, but he's gone his whole life. It's all he's ever done. And now he's at the point where they're not sure what they're going to do with it. Because here I am doing this. It was a business his dad started. Do you think about your succession? Is pelagic going to exist when you decide to hang it up?
That's a good question. And, I joke about that with my son every now and again, because he's sort of, maybe I'll run pelagic. And I said, well, maybe you got to do a few things first, and learn a few things. He's actually going to the landing school in Maine for a year doing systems engineering, which is great because, how to fix things. I mean, this is key. Sailing is easy by comparison.
Yep.
And, but, a lot of these things like what you're doing and what I'm doing, it's key man stuff. And, once I'm gone, will pelagic expeditions exist? I don't know. I probably doubt it. A lot of it hangs on me having direct, contact to all these clients. We never sign anybody up without having endless conversations with people, because that's what it's all about. They want to have that direct contact with the guy in charge. Doing a big trip, they're expensive, time consuming. It's a big chunk out. And it's all about that personal touch of making everybody feel comfortable. And, we got a professional operation. It's going to be great. We got a good team on board, blah, 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 blah. Here's the other clients, put them in touch and all those things. And whether anybody else can do that in my name of pelagic expeditions, who knows? I don't know, So, yeah, good question. I'm sure you're probably having the same sort of...
I got a long way to go. I hope.
You got a long way to go.
I hope I got a long way to go. But I guess, the reason we've decided to grow the business slightly is, and I think you touched on this earlier, I can't do everything myself and have a family and my own boat. We wanted to grow it just enough that I can do what you're doing. Choose when I want to go sailing. Choose when I want to do the trips. I still run the show, set the calendars, all the rest. But I have help now, and it allows for me to pursue other things in my life beyond just this, which has been very, very hard to get here. It's been a very difficult 5 years. But finally we're there, I feel like. Yeah.
There's a lot of graft. There's no doubt about it. Everybody says, "Oh, what an amazing life you have," and you said, "It's true. I have had an amazing life," and I'll never gainsay that. But it's a lot of work. It's a lot of risk, for sure. What we're into, yeah.
Last question. Did you reread all these things as this book was coming together? Because there's a lot of columns in there. Did you go back and reread everything?
Well, I had to reread it because then on some of those, some of the columns, I put a little postscript on the bottom.
Those are great.
Where I sort of, maybe I changed my mind a bit, or things evolved, or some news happened that needed to be tacked on, because some of the stuff goes back to 2014 when I started the column. So there's a few little additions here and there, but of course I had to reread it and do and actually in a few cases, some of it was edited by the magazine to go into the column, where I stuck with the original text, which is a bit longer. It's usually a case of cutting it down to 800 words, So I've been through it again. Yeah.
How many were you generally happy with what you had written, or how many cringe-worthy moments did you have?
No. I think I was pretty happy with everything I wrote back then, and pretty happy with it.
Well, I'll put a plug for the book at the top of the show when we publish this, Skip, and this is great. I mean, we've never actually met in person, so one of these days I'd love to sail with you.
Exactly, absolutely. We must do that, Andy. Yeah.
Cool.
Okay. Cheers, mate. All the best.
Thank you. Don't forget to check out the Quarterdeck if you want to dive deep on seamanship. Join me, August, Mia, and the rest of the 59 North team, as well as over 400 members on quarterdeck.59-north.com. On the Wind is the podcast about sailing, created by 59 Degrees North and hosted by me, Andy Schell, and also by August Sandberg, Emma Garshagen, and occasionally Ben Doer. The show is mixed and produced in Frederick, Maryland by Lee Cumberland. Ads are read by us, the hosts, and occasionally by 59 North's bosun Adam Brown and podcast producer Lee Cumberland. Episode artwork and website show notes are done by Laura Parent in San Francisco. The intro theme music is composed and performed by former podcast guest and musician Cameron Dale, while the outro music you're hearing now is, of course, by our friends, the Storm Weather Shanty Choir. We love hearing from our fans, so send your questions and comments to holdfast@59-north.com, and please do us a favor and review the show on iTunes or wherever else you get your podcasts. Until next time, hold fast.
I made up me mind that I was inclined to go to sea no more. No more, no more, to go to sea no more. I made up me mind that I was inclined to go to sea no more. As I was walking down the street, I met sweet Angeline. She said, come home with me, me lad, and we'll have a cracking time. But when I awoke, it was no joke. I found I was all alone. My silver watch and my money too, and my whole bloody gear was gone. Was gone, was gone. My whole bloody gear was gone. It was when I awoke, it was no joke, for my whole bloody gear was gone. As I was walking down the street, I met Big Rapper Brown. I asked him if he would take me in, and he looked at me with a frown. He said,
last time you was paid up with me, you talked up no score. But I'll take your advance and I'll give you a chance to go to sea once more.
once more, once more, to go to sea once more. I'll take your advance and I'll give you a chance to go to sea once more. Sometimes we're catching whales, me lads, but mostly we get none. With a 20-foot oar in every paw from 5 o'clock in the morn. And when daylight's gone and the night's coming on, we rest upon our oars. And oh boys, you wish that you was dead or snug with the girls ashore. Ashore, ashore, or snug with the girls ashore. Oh boys, you wish that you was dead or snug with the girls ashore. Come all you seafaring lads that listen to me song. When you go a big boating, boys, make sure you do not go wrong. You take my tip when you come off a trip, don't go with any whores. But get married instead and have all night in bed and go to sea no more. No more, no more, to go to sea no more. Get married instead and have all night in bed and go to sea no more. No more, no more, to go to sea no more. Get married instead and have all night in bed and go to sea no more.